Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We're so glad to have you join us today in the WBECS Coach Showcase. Today's session is When Humble Leadership Does Not Work, Coaching in Neglected Organizations with Sonja Wekema, who I'll going to introduce in just a moment. So whilst everybody gets situated, I can see everybody still coming in. Fabulous. So while everyone gets situated, please let me know that you can hear me by typing into the Q&A box where in the world you are joining us from today, and one thing that you are hoping to take away from today's session. So please find that Q&A box and let us know where you're calling from. Brilliant, thank you. So while everybody is getting into the Q&A box, here's a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session will last for 60 minutes. You're going to use the Q&A box to interact with us and ask any questions that you have. We're going to be pausing for questions throughout, so please do post any questions whenever anything pops into your mind, and we'll be sure to try and get that to Sonja. The chat box will only be used for us to deliver information to you, so you won't be able to type in there yourself. Also, there are no IM sessions for today's session or for any other sessions within the Coach Showcase track. So I'm just going to head over to the Q&A box and see who we have with us. Hello, Connie in Hong Kong. Hello, Ralph in Germany. Linda in Birmingham, Alabama. Hello, good morning. Got Leonard in Montreal. Carol in North Carolina. Simone in Switzerland. Nikki in Australia. Amazing. Sven in Belgium. Everybody is from all over the world, and that's why we love our global audience here at WBECS. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Right, so let's get started. My name is Beth Schofield, and I'm Head of Speaker Selection and Coordination at WBECS, and I'll be your host for Sonja's session today. Sonja is an executive team coach and cultural transformation consultant. She's the founder of network organization The Other Perspective and the newly set up consultancy The Board Whisperers. Prior to starting her own ventures, she worked with Capgemini and Shell, where she held a broad variety of roles, both on operational production sites and on global leadership level. Sonja's mission is for organizations to create a psychologically safe place for their workers, for leaders to embrace the human side of leadership, and for individuals to find their voice and speak about what's in their heart. And a fun fact about Sonja is that she is a technology geek, and she loves working with operating systems and motherboards just as much as she loves working with people. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sonja.
Thank you very much, Beth. And great to see where everyone's coming from and dialing in from. And I'm really thrilled as well, because this is a topic really close to my heart. And I hope after this session, it will be close to yours as well. And that you will know a bit more about what it is to coach in neglected organizations. So to get a bit of a feel of what neglect is, I will show you some pictures, and it might be good or nice for us to see what feelings do you get when you see these pictures. So I will go through 4 pictures. Just put in the Q&A what kind of feelings you get, or what questions or maybe comments. And this last one, my children almost asked me to take it out because they couldn't see it. And I think that's also a feeling that I get when I look at it myself personally. So let me just look in the chat what people say. They say neglect, forgotten, haunted, sad, potential, compassion, I see. Sad. Yeah, so what this is, it's all forms of neglect. Neglect of course, it doesn't just exist in organizations, it exists everywhere. And when you would look in the dictionary, what does neglect mean? Well, it is a verb, to neglect. And that means to fail to care properly. So it's all about caring. It's also a noun, neglect. And that's the state of being uncared for. So there's a lot to do with care. And do people really sense care in organizations? There is not so much research done yet on neglect in organizations. But there is one person, a fellow Dutch person, who has done his PhD on neglect in organization. And what he says is that neglected organizations suffer from a long-term lack of management and guidance of organizational development, as a result of which patterns of unharmful interaction between management and employees have started to arise. There are some elements to this definition, and the most important one is that there is a long-term lack of management and guidance, and also patterns of harmful interaction have started to arise. That also means it just is not always visible straight away. There's a lot hidden. And that hidden, it feels a bit like the neglect is neglected. And I've done some research on this myself. And of course, there is much more research needed. And I will also start working on that in 2022. Because I find this such an important topic. But what we will do today is I will explain to you a bit more about why this is such an important topic, also for the coaching community and consultancy community to know a bit more about. Then I will share with you how can you recognize a neglected organization. There are some cues, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you might not see those cues. Then the next one is our role as coaches. And that can be looked at in a broader way as well, because there might be consultants here on the line and some other people who have shown their interest. And then the last one is also the importance of creating healthy soil. Well, you see the picture behind this one already. There's someone diving into the not so healthy soil. There's not that much growing, but we will come back to that later. And then in the whole presentation, there will be some practical tips. What I would like you to also do, and Beth will be helping me with it, to track questions and maybe some comments in the Q&A box. And feel free to put that in, because in the meantime, we will be posing for some questions. But first, why this topic? And that's also what was in the introduction. When does humble leadership not work? And I was quite triggered because last year I wrote an article as part of my the final stage of my education for executive team coaching at the University of Amsterdam. And I was so thrilled and intrigued to read a bit more about humility and about psychological safety. And I saw so many books coming out and a lot of articles. And then I was looking at projects that I've been working on, coaching sessions that I had with people primarily in technical organizations. And we were working on humility and openness, transparency. But all of a sudden, I found out, together also with my clients, coachees, but also organizations, that some of these interventions just didn't work. And the question, of course, was, how come? And that's also how I came across the work of Joost Kampen, whose definition I just showed. He did a PhD on this. And what he found is that there is a link between neglected children and how you bring them back to a healthy space, and also to neglect in organizations. And the first time I said to an organization that there might be neglect at play, I remember it vividly. I put my hand in front of my mouth because I was a bit shocked that I mentioned to them that it was a neglected organization. But the good thing was that the people in that organization at that time, they were happy that finally someone pinpointed what was really the case. And together, also with some people who had energy to dive into this and to make it a better place, I was able to create gradually a better context for the people. But it needed to really start with a spark in the organization. And that's what I will be discussing a bit more. My findings, and as I said, there is much more research needed. So if you're interested afterwards, happy to have a conversation. So what happens in neglected organizations? This picture you've seen before. There are quite a lot of leaders, but also people who have tried and done a lot of different things. They just don't know what to do anymore. They have been working on different initiatives and they don't see it anymore. So they put their head in the sand and they are just deaf for it. Being deaf for it, I have another picture for this one. And this is also what I see in some organization. There are people, for instance, operators in a technical organization who have really great ideas. For instance, on working with a piece of material or a machine they are working with every day. They come up with ideas, but they don't know exactly how to voice it. So there's also a capability issue. And how come that these people are not able to voice it? That's because they have never learned to do it. So in this picture, there's this small boy talking, crying through this megaphone to, it might be his father, but it might also be the leader and the worker. But yeah, if you just watch TV, you don't hear it anymore. And then what also sometimes happens is that all of a sudden, in this case, maybe the father or the leader thought about, there was this bright idea of this operator. Let's just buy a new machine. And that operator is not so happy because that machine doesn't do what he or she wants it to do. So it's a waste of time, waste of money, and there was also no connection. So that's what we see a lot in these kind of organizations. So where does it really go wrong? And I have based this on several interviews, but also like inquiry research that I did for that article that I just mentioned. So what we see in a lot of organizations still, and primarily also in maybe a bit older technical organizations who want to move towards the future setup, but there's still this going on. Workers looking at their boss for the answer. But that workers, or those workers, they sometimes also don't know they don't have the clarity. So if this boss doesn't see those people moving, that boss might also be a bit, angry because nothing happens. But in the end, what is he, or she, might also be a she, what is he angry about? In the end, nothing happens, and that's the issue here. And what also happens is that there are people in the shade. They feel neglected. And this can be the worker, that operator that is not being listened to, might also be the leader, because that leader has never been trained to lead, never had a role model. But there's something with this neglect in the shadow. And we can hopefully get people out of the shadow. And that's where the role of coaches comes in. So that leader that knows it all also doesn't know it all. But that leader, in a lot of cases, doesn't see it anymore. Is blindfolded. And there are so many questions around that person. So the role that we can play as external coaches, as team coaches, but also as consultants, is to help gradually unfold this blindfold and help this person also answer some questions, but not by saying what the future should look like. It's really by working together. So I don't know, Beth, if there are also already some questions.
Let me just have a little look. So Beth just got a quick question and she's asking what was the name of your article, Sonja, and if it's available for viewing.
Yeah, it's not publicized yet. So it was the other perspective on vulnerability and leadership, And it takes on also Amy Edmondson's work and looking into, yeah, how you can deal with these situations as a coach. But yeah, I will try to get it published this year. Yeah, and as soon as it's ready, I will post it on my website, and then people can find it.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, no other questions at this point.
Okay, really good. So then some facts and figures, because that's of course always important. Hey, is this really a problem? And a lot of people might say, I don't really notice it, so it's not really a problem. But people who are in these organizations and going through this presentation, I hope, or yeah, I don't really hope it, but I think people might recognize some of it. And what you see, and this is also what I've seen in some organizations that I worked in, there have been examples of leaders, and I almost don't even dare to say it, but in my role as HR manager before I started my own business, I've been in situations where managers sometimes said like, okay, there is something going on with someone in my team and there might be mismanagement at play, but I will be moving on to another role in about 6 months. So why should I do something about it? And those are statements that really break my heart. And people who know me, they also know that I won't shy away from confronting these people. Because eventually, it's really, really important that these people also feel that they are seen and that their potential is being used. And if they're not at the right place, yeah, they can maybe do something else. But this is the neglect that I have seen, and also what I've heard from the people that I've interviewed. The other thing is also that it is not seen as the sexy thing. You don't score points. It's not that new startup kind of project that you can work on. You don't get the maybe new job title for this that you're aiming for. So yeah, there are different drivers linked to it. The other thing is also, I've been looking at some figures and data, also worldwide information. And Gallup in 2017, they did worldwide studies related to information from employee engagement numbers from 2015 to 2017. What you can see there is that only 15% of the employees are satisfied with their job. And of course, they do this every other year again. So I couldn't find the latest numbers, but it is almost similar what I've seen also with Mercer and with some other HBR articles. That also means that 85% does not tick the box, I am really engaged in my work. Another thing that also just came out, I think it was last week or the week before, there was also an article by Gallup, which stated that 70% of the employee engagement index number is related to the way that managers lead their people. And that's also why it is so important to focus on also the mid-level leaders and not just on the top. And there will be more coming out because I've seen that a lot of people are now starting to dive into the research of that one. The third one here is that there are so many unsuccessful change initiatives. I think the latest number that I've seen is 70% in the McKinsey studies. And what I see also in neglected organizations is that there is an initiative overload quite a lot. There's no overview. Nobody knows, or nobody, maybe one person, not too many people know what's going on in the organization. And people, especially on the work floor, shift leaders or people in mid-level leaders, in mid-level leader roles, they get so much to them, like HR wants something, finance wants something, IT wants something, and then they also just need to do their work. So yeah, how can you help them also create and drive this whole topic? And the last one, what I just mentioned, is there's much more research needed. And especially in what we call the wicked world that we now live in, with all the dynamics, with robotization, digitization, and people working more and more in the matrix structure, yeah, it is not possible anymore to just look at one boss stating what to do. And that's what the leaders know, and that's also what the workers know. But yeah, there's a gap that we need to dive into. So what my key message is of today is, we just saw the broken heart after the pictures, is to have a filled heart. And that heart will be beating if also all of us coaches are able to recognize neglect in organizations, but also know about some of the basic tools to support clients to also create that sustainable and safe and in the end thriving organizations. Any questions around this one in the chat, Beth?
I'll just have a little look. So Esther's asking, what do you do if there's a culture of neglect when nobody wants to take responsibility and nobody is accountable?
Yeah, well, that is in most cases the case. And that's also that picture of what I think might be a leader diving into the sand. People don't know what to do anymore. So in the interviews I did, but also in my own work, what I've seen is, and I will come back to that later as well, but it's really, really critical to have good one-on-one conversations and to truly understand what the issue is, and to find people in the organization who also want to make a change. Because if it's just the executive team saying, hey, we now need to tick this box and we need to do something because employee engagement scores are low, that's not going to work. So what we've seen is that if you start small and if you start with a really small team and create that spark, and also think about, because what happened in the past is really critical as well. So neglected organizations, as I mentioned before, in a lot of cases, you don't see that neglect. So what I sometimes use is the metaphor of brushing your teeth. If you don't do that for a week, probably you don't see it, or nothing falls out, no tooth falls out. But if you don't brush your teeth for a year or something, at some point you might see something black in your mouth. And that's also what happens in neglect in organizations. There's a lot happening underneath the waterline that you don't see. So it's also about asking people questions. What I do in most cases, I interview people, which I call key stakeholders. And in my world, key stakeholders are not the people who are the end responsible people. It's people across the whole organization. And when you sense certain things and when you hear things, and yeah, sometimes you're the first one who gives them attention. And from my practice, what I've seen in a lot of cases, and there might be coaches who have perceived similar situations, is that when you really truly listen, when you ask questions to understand what's going on, people finally get to grips and get in touch with their emotions. So it's also looking at what energy is there and what energy is hidden, what potential is hidden, and then gradually starting to build that whole energy up. So that is related to the culture. And pointing fingers is also what I just saw. What sometimes happens is also doing a diagnosis. Like personally, I have different tools that I use. I prefer to use something that the organization is already used to. And if not, I just work with a client just to see, okay, what would fly best here? And in some of these situations, it's good, yeah, to have a questionnaire, for instance, coming out, combined with interview sessions, and have conversations around it. Because then it will be about what you see, about the data, and it will not be about the people. So it's really working with the ball instead of the people. Yeah. Any other burning questions, Beth? Otherwise, I will.
We do have a few. I don't know, do you want to take another one now, or do you want to save some more for the end?
Yeah, one more is fine. Then, yeah.
Okay, so Claire asks, well, she says, I wonder if this 17% might have changed with people working from home. this has changed the culture of work. Have you seen anything about this?
Yeah, there are quite a lot of articles that just came out. And what I've seen also in some of I'm accredited in a lot of different tools. So I get a lot of messages also from research from those organizations. And what I've seen in some of these is that, the need for clarity, for feeling part of the organization has gone up. But with regards to the neglected organizations per se, I haven't seen any results there yet. So no, I'm scanning that as well, but I haven't seen that much. But of course, being at home all the time, and that's the same with children, which we make the link to as well. Like what we see is that the mental health for all kinds of people, how old or young they are, that is something to really, really consider. What I did see is there's a research that just came out from Great Place to Work, how organizations worked with both their employees and their clients. And there are some examples. For instance, Hilton, they did quite a lot to make sure that people still stayed in a role or supported them to find another role. And there were some more examples. So caring for people has become more and more important, but also creating clarity for what is expected. And of course, there might be organizations that need to cut jobs as well. So it's not easy for both job owners or entrepreneurs, but also for people with or not with a job anymore. Yeah. Okay, so then I will dive into the role of coaches, and that is both team coaches and individual coaches. And there are some linkages also with consultancy. So what is relevant when you, for instance, work with or in a neglected organization? And maybe not the whole organization is neglected. It might also be that there are pockets. Because in my interviews, I also spoke with people in organizations who said like, we make quite a lot of money and we are busy with the right things. We are investing in digitization, but there are still pockets in our organization where we sense some neglect. So that is important to know, and also to know how do you recognize this. And recognizing this is one thing, but it's also what do you do with it. So I will just give you some examples of what kind of cues might you pick up that you see in neglected organizations or in these pockets of neglect. It's just a list. And this is a list that came out of that research that I created last year. But it's also important to see if this issue or if this cue is going on for a longer period of time. If it's just a one-off, then it's also something that you need to be curious about. Was it just a one-off, or is there more happening? So instead of being paranoid or whatsoever, it's really, really important to stay curious and to stay in the learner mode. So some of these elements are related to the lack of communication. And what we see sometimes in these organizations is that people say, leaders in most cases, I have communicated. And that means I have sent an email. And communication is primarily related also to having the interaction and engagement with one another. What is also sometimes lacking, and that's coming back to the initiative overload, if people don't know what is expected of them, they also sometimes get really confused. So there's an issue there as well. And another element is that some organizations, they do not have a communication department. And if they do have one, it's always the question like, hey, what exactly are they focusing on? So the communication is a really critical topic to look at. The other thing is also that in these organizations, we see siloed ways of working. And that is also related to a hierarchical way of managing. So if you are more focusing on the horizontals, working in the matrix organizations, you will need to work with different stakeholders and across the silos. But this is also a way of, have people been able to also learn about the new way of working, and is the organizational structure set up in the right way to also go to a new way of working, because that is relevant to tackle the future in most cases. What we also see is that there's a fear to speak up, but also to listen up. So fear to speak up is related, for instance, to that example of the operator that I just mentioned. If someone asks something to whoever, their boss in a lot of cases, and they don't get any response, or someone says, yeah, that's you again, you're always moaning about something, then people will stop addressing it. And maybe their information is really critical for the organization. It's also the way of how people speak up. The listen up element is also about, like, do you have enough time available as a leader to really listen to what's going on in the organization? Or are you maybe afraid of your own position and maybe it doesn't help? So there are different drivers related to this. And there's no black and white, but there are different cues in this respect that we have seen. Also, and that's what we see a lot, there are lots of processes and structures because they are just there, or there were people or teams working on this. But are they really being used? So there is probably a process. There might be a process around, like, safety, for instance, in organizations. And that process is there for a reason, to keep people safe. But if there's no compliance, or if there's no way of also addressing this to people and stepping up and doing something about it, then it doesn't work. So, and if those processes and structures only exist on paper, then it doesn't embed that whole culture and structure which you need. The other one is also the lack of visible and sensible energy. So when you just walk through an organization, when that was still possible, because with COVID, of course, it's more difficult, you sense it sometimes, that there is no energy, or that there's hidden energy. And maybe you've seen the clip of Mr. Gauchel about the smell of the place. And that was quite an old clip, which I use quite a lot to just give people the feel. Like, there are organizations where you come in and you feel like, ooh, it's a bit dusty, it's stuck here. Or there are organizations where you feel the energy and the boost and the innovation that might come out. So that's also what you can sense. The other one is that there might be quite some victim behavior. So people saying something about, like, oh yeah, but that person doesn't listen, or I've tried it so often, but stepping up and showing accountability, that is what we need if you really want to drive an organization forward. And how to do that, especially if the scripts and the patterns in the organizations are so stuck after sometimes 20, 15 years, it's difficult to make that change. And also the as if or say yes, do no behavior. Like, they say yes just to get rid of that maybe boss, client, colleague, whatsoever. They say yes, they don't do no, but no one is saying anything about that anymore. And then the other one is that in some cases, there's also no real commitment from the top. And only if it's really going to be an issue for the organization, people will step up. But then still the question is, do they really support this? And this is an important one, because if there is no one in the organization really supporting it, then that's the question also for us as professionals to think about, okay, is there a role for me? How do I deal with this? And that's also related to contracting that I will come back to. So if you are working as a coach, you're not working as an interim manager, and the end game and the end results need to be in the hands of the organization itself. So that's really critical. So these are just some cues that you can think of understanding whether you're working with a neglected organization. So then the next one is, if you are coaching in a neglected organization, this is top sport. And I don't just say that for the reason of saying it. This is really tough sometimes. And that's also what comes out of the research done by Joost Kampen. In, let's say, normal, healthier organizations, there is a way of empathy. There's a way of working together. Sometimes you are being invited to go for dinner if you work with a team, yes or no. Of course, there are questions around whether you should join that, yes or no. In neglected organization, that's also what he found in his research. You really need to be strict around, you are the coach or the advisor, and that is the client. So there needs to be a really, really clear line between those two different areas. And then there are some other elements to look at. Like, instead of really just analyzing it straight away where you are, it's scanning the context for cues proactively all the time. Keeping notes, keeping records is really key, because that is also a way of bringing that back and showing the mirror to your client, of course, in a nice, gentle way. It's really, really important as well to postpone your judgment. So you might think, this is what it is, and we are going to dive into that and solve the problem. And that is not always the problem, the one you think it might be. So diving in too quickly, that's one of the pitfalls. Observing is also important. So how do people work with one another? How do they communicate? What is the nonverbal communication telling you? And then the intuition bit. So a lot of people, especially in the Western world, are really focused on, hey, what happens in the mind? But there's also more to your body. And especially as a coach, really trust your intuition. And if you do not trust what's happening, just check with other people that you trust. And then, this is quite a long list, so I won't go through everything, otherwise we are not going to make it on time. But also, when you do something, really, really be conscious about your role and also set your boundaries. So that's related also to being maybe too informal, too friendly, but communicate around it, because people need to know. And then your own development and self-reflection is really key, and setting up helplines. So if you do all this all by yourself, and remember, it's top sports, at some point it might drain your energy, and then you might not just hurt the client organization, you might also hurt yourself. So that is not what you want. And then the last one is, or almost last one, be there for your client and yourself. And this last one is really critical. So go in, and that is for all coaches really key. Like, when you start a coaching trajectory, always have a clear contract. What is expected of you? And of course, you can work within that contract, but especially in neglected organizations, be really, really clear around what are the mutual expectations. And if it doesn't feel right anymore, or if you notice elements that are not flying, recontract as well, because that's key. And the reason why that is key is that clarity is key. And there is a fragment by Brené Brown that I use quite a lot, and I will read it out, because this is why clarity is key. And that is, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Most of us avoid clarity because we tell ourselves that we are being kind. when what we're actually doing is being unkind and unfair. Feeding people half-truths or bullshit make them feel better, which is almost always about making ourselves more comfortable, is unkind. Not getting clear with a colleague about your expectations because it feels too hard, yet holding them accountable for blaming them for not delivering is unkind. Talking about people rather than to them is unkind. And this lesson can transform your life, as per Brené Brown. So that's also especially in neglected organizations. Be really clear. Tell people what you do, why you do it, ask them for their opinion and check if they are okay with what's happening. Okay, any questions around this?
We have tons of questions now, Sonja. So I'll just give you one from Carl, and he asks, when and how do you conclude that a leader will not change?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And that's also the question, what is your role here? And who have you contracted with? So yeah, this is one of those standard answers, it depends. So there are multiple factors to look into. What is your remit? Who do you work with? Who's the sponsor of the client that you have? Are you coaching a team? Are you coaching an individual? For what reason did you coach that person? So yeah, I cannot just answer that question with a, this is the answer. I think it always is related to the context and to the situation. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
yeah. Sorry.
Okay, one from Matthew. He says, how do you coach employees where depression is the root cause of feelings of neglect?
Yeah, with depression, I think as coaches and HR professionals, we all know that don't go there where you cannot do something yourself. So if professionals need to be engaged, it's really, really important that the handover in these situations is done in a proper way. So personally, I'm related to the ethical standards of EMCC, ICF, and ESRIC. So when I would come across a situation like that, I would always go to my helplines, talk to my supervisor, talk to my peers, of course, in full, without disclosing anything. And then also, relating, of course, or related to the contracting to the relevant parties in the organization. So these are things to really be mindful of, that might be the case. But then it is important to let the professionals do their work. Of course, if the person wants to be helped.
Thank you. Do you want to do the last piece of your presentation, Sonja, and then questions, or do you want a couple more questions now?
Yeah, I think let me just finish it.
Yeah. Fabulous.
Okay. So I will just quickly go through some pitfalls because some of it, oh, this is too quick. Sorry, it's moving too quickly. Number one. So if you move too quickly, it might be that the organization cannot follow, or your client, if it's an individual client. And especially in neglected organization, when people feel neglected, and this is also related to neglected children, you can give them books, you can give them a lot of tools and interventions, but if you do not know and measure what the maturity level or capability level is of your client, then it is quite hard to have a really good intervention. So what came out of Joost Kampen's research is that it would be best to decide what, or to measure what maturity level we are talking about, and then start from one level up and really do some hand holding there. So doing it too quickly and acting too swiftly, that is one of the pitfalls. The other one is also the filling the leadership void. So one of those questions that just came up is like, hey, if a leader doesn't function, what is your role? Well, as as a coach, external coach, but also as an internal coach, you are not the one making these decisions. What sometimes also happens is that when, for instance, you're coaching a team, and that's what happened to me quite regularly, sometimes I sense that there is this void, and it's a leadership void. And if you're not careful, you might be pulled into that void and you will end up doing what a leader might be doing. But that's not why you are there. So instead of jumping in, it's best to just address it and also have a conversation around it. Like, hey, I sense this. So also your emotions are data, which you can use in these situations. You can tell the people that you work with what you sense and how to deal with it. Well, number 3, I think most people in coaching land know this one. So helping the client eventually doesn't help anyone. So the people need to be able at some point to, help themselves as well. Then another one, and that's especially for multinationals and also other maybe bigger organizations, but even in countries, there might be cultural differences. And if you are not aware of that, you might think, me, for instance, being Dutch, going to the UK, I can probably be quite direct sometimes. But if I'm not aware of that, then I might damage the relationship without even having that intent. The next one is being too friendly. That is not your role to be friends with someone. Of course, it's important to build a relationship and to have an empathetic kind of bond with people. But if you're too friendly, then it might be in neglected organizations that you cannot play your role in the right way. And that's also related to being too emotionally involved. So keep yourself sharp. And that also relates to setting the personal boundaries. So if you are too vulnerable and you don't set those boundaries, you might be sucked in. And from an energy point of view, that's probably not the best thing to do. That brings me also to this one that you have already seen. I always talk about the ripple effect that people can create. So the stronger your core is, the more impact you will make. But you need to be able and dare to do some self-reflection. And this is both for coaches and consultants really important, but also for leaders and also for leaders in, who might be operators, because they might also be leaders in their way. And this is also related to self-awareness. So what kind of triggers do you need to really get upset or sad or be really energetic? So if you know that, then you can play with it. And one way, and I will go a bit quicker now to be able to also share everything that I planned. To do that, mindfulness is an important one. And personally, I always struggled a lot with mindfulness. I knew that it was probably good to do some breathing exercises, to, having a clear mind, but I struggled so much with doing this. And last year, and that's also when I did my dissertation for Esrich, I was diving into me. How do I deal with certain circumstances? And as a coach, my question was, how can I be fully present? And that means fully present with me, but also fully present with the people that I worked with. And how can I be and see myself on some sort of meta level? Like what intervention might be useful, but also coming back to the previous page, what triggers you maybe to do something, a little bit, I don't know, too energetic or too quiet. So what is relevant in this situation? And that's really core. And when you practice mindfulness, there's also a lot of neuroscientific evidence that you can create new neural pathways that help you also to stop when a trigger happens. So, and there's this quite famous quote, I guess, between stimulus and response, there is a choice, a choice point. And if you consciously choose, then you have freedom. And this is the model that I create for it. So when I am too much focused on the top, so for me, that means outside focus, and I'm quite an extroverted person. So I think I grew up in that way, being really outer focus. But if I go down, I can also sense my inner self. And if I'm aware of this meta level, I can also feel like, okay, am I now too focused on me or too focused on the outer side? And the left and right can be used for instance, behavioral polarities. Like if you would go right, you might think, hey, it's quite extroverted, looking into a lot of different new ideas, new perspectives, whatsoever. If you go to the left, it might be related to the introverted side, being observing, which is of course also really important in neglected organizations. So when you are in the middle, in the midpoint, you can decide for yourself and sense what is good for you, but also what is good for the situation. So that's key here. So that is with regards to your inner self, creating this as and looking at it as top sport, but also saying stop if it is too much. Because in neglected organizations, at some point it might become too much. And then it is not fair for yourself and also not for the organization to continue. But to stop it requires a lot of effort, communication, and creating that clarity. So the last element that I would like to share, and then we have some time for Q&A, is how do you then bring organizations or people from a neglected situation to psychological safety? And that all starts with the health or the level of health of the soil that you work with. So if it's really dry and if it's dirty soil, you can put a lot of seeds and water on it. And some seeds and water or some seeds might work, but most seeds will not work. So what do you need to do? You need to do some groundwork. You need to work on that ground, make it healthy, take out all the dirty stuff so that at some point small plants will grow. And then eventually you will get this really nice field of flowers. But like in nature, this doesn't just happen overnight. You need to have some patience, and I call it purposeful patience. So it's not just waiting for the sake of waiting. No, it's waiting because it needs to grow. And then what you see is if the soil is still really dirty, you start with a limited belief and limited trust. So focusing on that, building the relationship, but also with a small, strong team is really key. Because if you don't build those foundations, it will be really tough to get to the psychologically safe situation. And then after, it can take 1 to 2 years, maybe more, maybe less, but that's of course also related to the research that we still need to do more of. If you have healthy soil, there will also be more pockets of energy and an increased pull from the organization because something is happening. And also here you can use, for instance, change agents or people who are really boosting the culture. But that also takes time. So this is about the sheep, who is going first. Then you can also sow the seeds. So there you can see some increased energy, and also there's more sharing of vision and mission, and people know what they're doing it for. The purpose will come out better as well. And here's also where the management team, mid-level leaders play a really important role, but also, for instance, in technical organizations, frontline leaders. So they need to be included in these things. Then it's getting better. Small plants are coming. Clarity is increasing. It's more focus around what are the big ticket items? Where do we want to work on? And at some point, you also see that the behaviors are more and more aligning with the values. And it's not necessary to stop people anymore from doing nasty things, because it will just happen. And then the last one is the flowers. And that's also where you see psychological safety coming. Innovation is coming. There are pockets of new energy coming. But the most important thing is here, this is not an end state. So this is ongoing work. So yeah, and it might be that there are pockets in the organization who look a bit different. So, but the whole thing is, don't give up, and make sure that you also know what your role is. And eventually you can take that little child, which some people feel they are when they're in this isolated situation, you can take them out of the shadow, and then these children will be there as the next generation, counting on all of you. And I think last, 2 weeks ago, I guess, there was this beautiful poem with this lady who is half my age, so the next generation. And it's talking about the shade and the light. And what she says, there's always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. So this is also my plea to all of you. Help our children getting a good, work life or life overall. And we have a role to play. But also be mindful about the damage you can do if you don't, do this right. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonja. That was a really fantastic session. So many brilliant questions and comments coming through. We are going to get to the questions in just a second. I think we'll have time to answer a couple. But first, as everybody knows on the call, WBECS is coach created. And so that we can continue providing you with the services that you love, please take a moment to share your input on this coach showcase session and any other feedback that you would like to share with the WBECS team via the survey link that we're posting into the chat box now. We really, really appreciate your feedback. So please do click on that link and let us know your thoughts. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. So I'm just going to grab a couple of questions. And I do believe, Sonja, you are happy to answer some questions in Facebook afterwards. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
The ones that we don't get to, because we do have so many. So I thought this was a lovely question from Alana, and she asks, is there anything that is actionable that you have found that really works? For example, you said that there are certain organizational structures that get in the way. Are there any specific organizational structures that you have found to work better? And if so, which ones?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I have to say it depends again. No, so there are a lot of different kinds of organizations. So of course there are the startups with the people who have never been in leadership roles. They start with a bright idea, and at some point they see, okay, oh, now we need to manage. How do we do this? And some people might not like to manage. So how do you deal with those situations? Do you hire new people in, new CEO, a new operations director? How does that work? So that is one end of the spectrum. The other end is there might be organizations, and I know a few, who already exist for 100 years or more, or 60. They still have machines and they have software from the 80s. They have a lot of different stuff, but they also suffer from, the money side of it. Like, hey, it all needs to be funded as well. So how do you make the right decisions? And eventually, I think a lot of attention went to the process side of it, the financial side of it, the hard KPIs, as we tend to call it. And that is also the reason why for some organizations, people say like, oh, I've never had any opportunity to do personal development. So for those organizations, you might need a completely different setup. So yeah, that is also almost a consultancy question. But you, as a coach, you can work with the person you work with to see, okay, so what has already been done? And in most cases, they already know the answer, but it's your role to get that out of them as well. So, and that's also to be mindful of, do you have the role of consultant or do you have the role of coach? And that is different.
Amazing, thank you. Well, we are at the top of the hour now, and we do have to be mindful of everybody's time. So that brings us to the end of today's session. But if you did have a question that didn't get answered, please do head over to Facebook, and Sonja will try and get to as many questions as she can. I'm not going to promise that she'll answer all, but she did mention at the start that she would be happy to answer questions over there. So we've just dropped the link to the Facebook post in the chat. So if you did have a question that you'd like Sonja to answer, please do post it in there. And any other comments that you wanted to share about the session, that would be great. Okay, so tomorrow in the full summit, we have Oleg Konovalov presenting Visionary Leadership, how to create and execute a successful vision. We have Tom Colditz presenting Breaking Barriers, the expansion of coaching markets at scale in education. So we hope that you'll join us for those in the full summit tomorrow. And that's it from us today. Thank you so much, Sonja. It was a really wonderful session. I think it was greatly appreciated by everyone on the call. Thank you everybody for joining, and we hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and goodbye.
You're very welcome. Bye everyone.